We almost never get love.
We almost never get what, a love question?
Yeah.
I hate love questions, that's why.
Yeah, that was sarcastic because that's all what Reddit has.
The only reason we got this love question was because there's a prohibition in it and I wanted to show it to you.
Ah, yeah.
So Diana, last week we talked, we actually got in, was it last week or the week before? Last week or the week before, we finally kind of got into what prohibition is. And because it's been one of those things in our Bonatti, in our list of consideration 4, but I've been kind of skipping over it because it's hard to usually find, and it's kind of hard to explain. But it's all about, but remember, with all of these configurations we're talking about, we're always talking about who's the fastest, who's the slowest, who's almost as fast. And that's really the key to understanding almost all of this. So I want to bring your attention. So this person was wondering, am I gonna, it's the usual, does he like me? And we talked and whatever, are we gonna meet again? Blah, blah, blah. And of course, what kind of Aries on the ascendant for a love question, right? This is a horary. So Aries, this was an actual horary question. This was not a natal chart. So why is Aries on the ascendant, right? So that's kind of interesting. And then because usually the ascendant should kind of give us a hint, right? That's how we often know that the chart is radical, right? Somebody asks a love question, there's Libra rising or Taurus rising, things like that. Or Venus, like, oh, we had a love question earlier on Reddit today and Venus was in the ascendant, right? So it was that kind of thing. So that was my first, like, what the hell? Mars ruled love question, fascinating. And she was wanting to, it was one of those things they had come together, maybe friends or something, and flirted, and he's gone off to something and she hopes that they'll come back together again or something like that, but I don't remember how intense it got. So what the attention I want to bring you to is the applying sextile from Venus to Mars here. So Venus is at 1 degree of Capricorn, or in the 2nd degree of Capricorn, and applying to Mars in the 5th degree of Scorpio. So as a result, that kind of says yes, especially because this is also pushing nature. This is pushing nature because Venus is in the exaltation of Mars and she's applying to Mars. So that's a pretty good sign. If you remember what we have been saying about what reception does, reception destroys or eliminates evil, and it guarantees success or perfection. Not necessarily success, but guarantees perfection. So, I mean, we haven't looked at the moon yet, right? But that's a pretty good sign. And look at Venus is right on the, very, very close to the cusp of the 10th. So angular and everything. So this is a really good sign that, yeah, maybe this could happen. However, so this is where the prohibition comes. Mars is the slowest. Venus is not as slow. Mercury is the fastest. Notice that Mercury is ahead of Venus. Venus is at 1 degree and 18. Mercury is at 1 degree 24. Before Venus is actually able to make it to Mars, Mercury will come and perfect his conjunction, which prohibits Venus's. This is classic prohibition. Classic prohibition. So Venus is coming at him, but before she gets to him, Mercury slips in and gets to him, which means that her matter can't get perfected. So
she's going to say snippy to ruin it.
She's going to what?
Say something snippy that'll ruin the whole thing.
I totally thought the same thing, right? Exactly, because definitely the abusive speech or and manipulative speech, or this person, yeah, exactly. Thank you. Very good.
Yeah.
Or even
Awesome observation.
Or even this motherfucker is going to jail or something, right? Because or she's going to jail because the 12th. It's the 12th from the 7th, right? So it's the 12th from the 7th going to her though, not to the Venus. But that's interesting because it's just left. So this could mean it's pipe dreams, right? 12th from the 7th. Mercury as the ruler of the 12th from the 7th, but going to the ruler of the ascendant here in this chart, right? Or ruler of the sixth. So it could be an illness that gets in the way. That's what I told her. It could be an illness, right? Because Mercury rules the sixth that gets in the way of it happening, or a sibling could get in the way of it happening. I don't know how the sibling, or a short journey or something. I mean, look at, if you think about, like, I don't know, I know that Chris Brennan sometimes talks about the ideas that Lee Lehman had around horary, which was when you're dealing with a love question, understanding that the sign that the significators are in tell you what they're thinking about. So for instance, if for instance, I'm asking about somebody, whether they love me or not, I want to see them in my sign or in my exaltation. So if Aries is rising, I want to see the ruler of the seventh in Aries or in Scorpio, right? Because then it means they're thinking about me, right? Look, this person isn't really even thinking about themselves, or the other person. They're thinking about themselves, right? Mars is in Scorpio in his own sign, ruler of the ascendant. This person's really just thinking about themselves. I guess it would be kind of a fun fantasy, right? And look, in the 12th from but like I said, either there's some kind of illness that comes up and gets in the way, or bad times that come and get in the way of it happening. But that's the prohibition in this chart, which I thought was so incredibly fascinating. Just, I have, to be honest with you, I don't know that I've ever really recognized one in a chart before. All of this stuff that we're learning about, translation, refrenation, like translation of light I was using, refrenation I knew about, but really going into these terms like we have been and really using them like I've started doing, this is my first time, like kind of like with you, and I'm loving it. I think I understand now why so much of this stuff was so important. Okay, so that was any questions about prohibition? So once again, I just want to re-outline that prohibition is all about a faster planet stealing glory, stealing thunder from something that's about to happen, slipping in, right? And so that's what happens. Venus is going to Mars, but Mercury is faster, and so bam, can slip in. And so that's what happens. So knowing remember when we were doing the medieval class and I was always doing the Chaldean order, slowest to fastest. I was trying to make sure that gets in, trying to make sure that always gets in with you guys, because that's the essence of all of this, of applying and separating, of all of figuring out all these recognizing these aspect patterns. All of that is about who's faster, who's slower, who's applying, who's separating, who got in there faster, who's cutting it off, who's whatever, right? So so this is classic prohibition. This is a classic, beautiful, classic prohibition, and what might have actually come to be. However, look how the moon is not an aspect to either the ruler of the first or the seventh. So this is pipe dreams. And look how and the moon is in Jupiter's sign. Jupiter rules the 12th. Yeah, and Jupiter rules the 12th. Pipe dreams. This person's pipe dreaming. So, or in my opinion, they're pipe dreaming. I think I was a little nicer. It's on I put it on my website. I think I did a horary delineation of that and put it on the website. And because of the prohibition, and it's rare to see. Any other stuff that we like? Okay, well, let's see if we see any of the receptions we were talking about to bring home your point about zodiac signs, or the points I was making about zodiac signs. Oh yes, okay. So what we have here, okay, so first of all, what I want to also say is, understand that any planet that is in its own sign or exaltation can receive any other planet. There doesn't, like, it's not the same. They can't necessarily push, right? Pushing is synonymous with application, but they can receive because they're so powerful. They can kind of give benefit. So what we have once again is Venus is in Capricorn, which is the exaltation of Mars, and Mars is in Scorpio. So Venus is pushing nature at Mars because planet A is in the exaltation of planet B and also applying. Same goes for Mercury. Mercury is in Scorpio, thus he's pushing nature to Mars as well. So this Mars is actually really well, depending on the houses, this Mars is actually well situated, or is getting quite a bit of his nature from these two planets. He's getting his nature, and then he's getting the cooperative nature of the other planets. And that's something I wanted to talk about. Because I'm starting to understand reception, or these kinds of reception, and what does it mean when they're pushing their nature? Whose nature is being pushed, right? So I bet you all have been wondering that. Whose nature is being pushed? If it says pushing nature, what nature is being pushed? In my opinion, and from what I think I've read, both natures, both the nature of the planet, which in this case would be Venus, and Mars's nature as exaltation ruler of Capricorn. I'll say it again. So when we're dealing with something like this, where we have pushing nature, Venus is in Capricorn, applying to Mars, then what gets pushed, what the natures that get pushed are Venus's nature and Mars's nature as the ruler of Capricorn by exaltation. That's I mean, I'd love to confer with Ben Dykes about this or someone else, but that's what I think is going on. And that's what I'm kind of looking at when I'm looking at charts right now. I'm also, the things I'm really looking at in charts right now, based on what we've been doing, is I'm really looking at that return of virtue thing. I'm really, really looking at reception hard. And because both of those things, both reception and return of virtue, basically make an implication about how powerful the aspect is, how benefic it is, how malefic it is. Does it actually work or not? So I just want to, I'm harping on those things because those are the things I myself am looking at in charts right now, looking at and looking for things. And I'm definitely finding, I'm going to keep bringing it up, obviously. But what I'm definitely finding is a lot of aspects don't work if there is a return of virtue with detriment. And we're going to go back into what that stuff means a little bit later. What I thought I would do is review the material that we did last week. Actually, no, let's just do this right now. Let's get into, because I do want to make sure, although there is barring prohibition, I want to just kind of get into this reception or this return of virtue. Okay, so a return of virtue happens if a planet is applying to planet A is applying to planet B, and planet B is either combust or retrograde. Okay, so that's the main thing, right? And so if a planet is combust or retrograde, then it returns its virtue to the planet that initially gave it. So the idea is, let's say I'm carrying a bundle of sticks and I've decided I don't want to carry it anymore. And I decide to give it to Saturn, but Saturn is combust and he's too weak to carry the stick. So he gives it back to me and I decide to go on. That would be a return of fitness. I take the sticks back and I go on and finish the job. Okay, so that's a return of fitness, which implies then that shit can still happen. Okay, so because we see retrogradation all the time in charts. So I'm also the two things I'm trying to gauge is this. Is retrograde really as bad as all that? So that it's not, so that things are, so that would be kind of why they would say that retrograde is one of the worst impediments, is because of this return of virtue, right? Combustion and retrograde return virtue. So that would kind of imply that those are really the two worst things to be happening to a planet on some level. But we see retrograde everywhere, which means we see aspects to retrograde planets everywhere. That's one of the things I'm looking at is, oh, does that mean these, in my own chart, I've got an opposition to a retrograde planet, but it's a return. So it's a return of virtue, but it's with fitness because the other planet is on the ascendant, right? If it were 3 and 9, would there be a similar thing? So you see what I'm saying? So that's kind of my point is Are these aspects working or not? And there is now kind of a way of seeing, based on reception, whether aspects are really benefic or not, or really malefic or not, and via return of virtue, whether they're actually working in the fucking first place. That's my point. That's why I'm so obsessed with this right now. So I'm just going to once again go into this return of fitness to the descriptions. I'm just going to keep harping on this because, like I said, this is maybe a key that we unlock. Because, you know, why does one chart work and one chart doesn't work and they both got Venus moon trine, right? I mean, it certainly could mean that the houses are different. Certainly it could mean that the moon trine is happening with detriments or something like that, you know, but at the same time, it could also mean that there's a return of fitness happening. And that means that, and it's with detriment and it can't work. Right? It might mean that the moon is combust and she's trying to apply to Venus and, you know, that ain't working, right? So fitness. So remember what we're talking about. Planet A is applying to planet B, but planet B is either retrograde or combust. So, okay, so one of the things that ensures fitness is if there is reception between those two planets, right? Why? Because reception removes evil. Right? So that's important. But see, there's all these layers to it because what if they're receiving each other, but the planets are cadent? You know, so that's kind of where I'm going with so much of this stuff. Anyway, okay, so that's the first thing. The second is if planet A is direct, right? Because you can apply retrograde, right? So you can be applying from retrograde. Planet B is combust, and both are in angle or succeeding houses. So that's what's going on with mine. Well, mine is not combust, it's retrograde. So I'm assuming that retrograde is included here, but it doesn't specify, so maybe not. 3, planet B is combust or retrograde. Okay, this one specifies. Planet B is combust or retrograde or cadent from the angles. Did you hear that? Or cadent. So combust, retrograde, or cadent. If you remember our list of what debilitates a planet, combust, retrograde, and cadent are the first 3 things. And the pushing planet is angular or succeedent. So this pushes out, this expands this understanding that really a return of virtue can happen when planet B is cadent. That's kind of what this implies, right? Combust or retrograde or cadent, not combust or retrograde and cadent, or not combust, retrograde, combust and cadent, or your cadent and, or, you know, it's either of the 3, any of those 3. So that's an important thing. So, and then with detriment, I think there's only 2 main ways yet. So planet A is cadent and combust or retrograde. So cadent and combust or retrograde. Planet B is angular or succeedent. So there needs to be 2 debilities for planet A. They need to be cadent and either, so planet A, remember, is the one applying. So they need to be either cadent and combust or cadent and retrograde. So see, I just answered my question, didn't I? Combust or retrograde or cadent. Cadent and combust or retrograde. And then look here, both pushing planet and planet B are combust or cadent. Cadency is included. That's with detriment. So it doesn't even have to be retrograde. It can be, so for instance, let's say I've got Jupiter in Cancer in the 6th house, and I've got Venus in Taurus applying to it in the, no, I don't want to do that. What would be, so 6, so, oh, I've got, what would be from the Cancer? Oh, I've got Venus in Aries squaring it from the 3rd. That would be return with detriment. So that square would have something wrong with it based on this. Now, to be honest with you, now we might find that this is too general. We might find that maybe we need to do the same here as we did here. I don't know yet. I don't know yet. We might find that we need to include more than one in order for it really. But right now he's saying if planet A is cadent and planet B is cadent, there's a return of virtue and it's with detriment. Okay, so in all obviously, if planet A and planet B are both combust, then it's a conjunction that's happening, right? So basically he's saying if planet A and planet B are combust and applying, or if planet A and planet B are both cadent and there's an application, it's return with detriment. He said nothing about retrograde. I'm assuming retrograde would make it even worse, right? So retrograde would probably be in there too. Okay, so I just wanted to go back over that, and now we'll come to the information that we were talking about last week. And I might skip over some of that stuff about the star. We're going to skip over the stuff about the stars, but I am going to talk about this thing here. So Diana, what we were looking at was this thing called so what basically they were saying is that if a planet that's a significator, remember, we're not just talking about natal here. So that's always the thing to remember. We're talking about every form of astrology. So as a result, if we're talking about two significators, I want to get pregnant. And that means that the ruler of the first and the ruler of the fifth are really important. So what this particular consideration says is that there are secret helpers that if I found the ruler of the fifth on this secret helper, and in this particular condition, it would be called this strong secret helper. But then there are also open helpers, and they're planets. So the secret helpers are fixed stars, and the open helpers are planets. So, and the open helper basically is if you find the significator themselves to be in this condition. Okay, so basically what he's saying is that if you find, the ruler of the fifth, we're going to use the ruler of the fifth. If you find the ruler of the fifth, and he's on Regulus to the minute, and it's the sun on Regulus to the minute when Regulus was still in Leo, and he's in the ascendant or the 10th house, that is called a strong secret helper. That's like the strongest secret helper you can get. And so that's like as good as it gets. But it will, you won't know why things go so well, but it's going to go really, really well, and nobody will be able to understand why, and it's because of this fixed star. So we were talking about that, and we looked at a few charts, and I said I think basically what they were saying was no longer than 50 minutes of arc between the planet and the star. Whereas we looked at Donald Trump, we looked at Placido Domingo, we looked at Luciano Pavarotti, and all of them were within about 3 degrees of some major fixed star. They had something important within 3 degrees. Donald Trump had the ascendant right on the Regulus within a few minutes. And then the others had within like one or two degrees. So we decided that maybe it's a little bit further. But I want to come back to this here because I think that this is something useful to keep remembering about what makes a planet do good, what makes a planet fuck up, or screw you over, right? And the strongest open good one, right? So we just talked about the secret helper. The strongest open good one is when a planetary significator of some matter, right? We just talked, in this case, we're using the 5th house, is in its own domicile, in an angle, in the very minute of the cusp, direct, fast in course, received, right? We've been talking a lot about that, free from any impediment, which happens most rarely. Now, the thing I want to bring your attention to is this, in the very minute of the cusp. Because this is how we understand now that, especially, this is how the quadrant system came to be, was the Persians and Arabic astrologers started delineating that there was a stronger, and it came from the Vedic, it comes from Jyotish. Even though they use whole sign houses, they consider the degree of the ascendant, which then becomes like a, not really, it doesn't become an equal chart, but it comes basically the cusp is the same in every house, but it's a whole sign chart, but it's a whole sign house. In this particular case, what they started realizing was that planets were stronger the closer they were to cusps, and that there was a portion of the house that was the strongest. And so we're going to see it now. We're going to kind of get it, it becomes implied. There is no real material that says, okay, this is the strongest part of the house, and blah, blah, blah. But what we're seeing is he's saying it here. So the significator is in their own domicile. They're in an angle. They're in the very minute of the cusp. So that means that the cusp is considered the strongest part of the house. Direct, fast, and course, etc. Okay. Now, the next strongest, which, so that's the strongest. This is the stronger open good one, is when the significator is in an angle in its own domicile or exaltation. Notice that now exaltation is included by 1 degree ahead of the line or by 2 degrees after. It starts to lose strength the minute it leaves the cusp. Right? And then all the other stuff we know, free from malefics and received, blah, 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 which more rarely happens, but it could happen. Then as we go further down, the strong, good one is he's in an angle in its own domicile or exaltation, ahead of the line by 3, past it by 5. Getting weaker as we move away from the cusp. The weak open one, and here we go, is when a planet is in 2 of its own lesser dignities, right? So that would be like triplicity in term or term in face, in an angle by 5 degrees ahead or 15 degrees after. So 15 degrees after the cusp was considered the most active part of the house. And it looks like 5 degrees before to 15 degrees after the cusp is the most active part of the house, which is why we include planets that are 5 degrees ahead of a cusp in that house.
So from the degree of the cusp, we count from the degree of the cusp, not from the zodiac sign. Like it's not 15 degrees of the zodiac, it's 15 degrees from the degree of the cusp.
From the cusp itself. Here,
Okay.
let's look. So let's look at this. So based on this, now we don't have any, we don't have any, we only have 1 planet that's in its own sign, right? But it's not, right? So, but it's not angular, right? It's not angular, but so it's Saturn.
We also have Mars.
Mars is in own sign. Where is he?
Mars is in Scorpio.
Yes, yes. So this could have it could have happened with this one, right? It actually could have happened with this. But Mars is 8 degrees away, right? So really, if this were, think if this were the sign of Aries instead, and the sun were here, the sun would be a stronger open helper because the sun would be 2 degrees away, right? Remember, it was 1 degree before or 2 degrees into the house, right? So if this were Aries instead of Scorpio, but because Mars is so far away in this particular case, he would not be considered. But if he were at 10 degrees of Scorpio and right on this cusp, he would be an exact example of what we're of the strongest open helper. So the strongest open helper is right on the cusp. The stronger open helper is like this sun. If this were Mars, so rather this is even better. If this were Mars instead of the sun, then Mars would be the stronger open helper, right? Now, whatever's down here, let's say we had Venus. Let me get my dignity chart and I'll look and see what would be term and face or triplicity in term or something here. So based on my astrological dignity chart, let's say we said 22 degrees of Scorpio. 22 degrees of Scorpio is Jupiter.
Jupiter, yeah.
Okay, so Jupiter's term. Okay, so let's say Jupiter were in his term and face at 22 degrees right here. He would be that next level down, right? So he would be that strong open helper that was well, he'd be the weakest one, right? That was within 15 degrees, right? So let's go back for 1 second, just so we can get an idea one more time. So the very strongest is on the exact degree of the cusp, right? To the very minute. The stronger is 1 degree ahead of the line or 2 degrees after. So if Mars had been where the sun was, that would be what was going on. And in domicile or exaltation, right? We have nothing 3 degrees before the line or 5 degrees after in domicile or exaltation, but we juxtapose Jupiter there. Uh-huh. Oh,
No,
okay.
we're talking about within the same house, right?
Yeah. It doesn't. I mean, so with the example we're using, yes, this can be any angular house, right? Yes, we are talking about the same house. I get your question. Yes, we are talking about the same house. Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So it's only for the conjunction, not for like a trine or anything else, not for any other aspect.
On the angle. So the planet needs to be in that condition on the angle.
Yeah. It has
Got
to be
it?
a conjunction for the strongest helper.
Exactly. So the strongest, it has to be an exact conjunction to the minute for the
Yeah.
strongest. So so once again, all of the, sorry. Okay. So all of it. So in domicile, not exaltation. That's the important thing, right? The next stronger can be in domicile or exaltation. Remember the pointing system, right? Domicile has 5 points, exaltation has 4. This might be why you see why it goes with the weakening of this signification. So the strongest open good one is when significator of some matter is in its own domicile, in an angle, in the very minute of the cusp, direct, fast in course, received, free from any impediment. So we'll see if we find any like that. But now we kind of know what the criteria is for how the hierarchy falls, how it folds, right? So 1 degree ahead, it needs to be in domicile or exaltation, 1 degree ahead or 2 degrees after. Then the next level down is domicile or exaltation, but 3 degrees ahead or 5 degrees after, same house. Then the weak open good one is when the planet is in 2 of its own lesser dignities in an angle by 5 degrees ahead or 15 degrees after. And the weaker open good, now so there's another one, it's when you have a domicile or exaltation, but it's either cadent, so it's domicile exaltation or 2 of its lesser in the cadence, aspecting the ascendant, right? So that's notice the cadence aspecting the ascendant. Which ones are those?
Cadence, it's the 9th.
And
then what would be
3rd and 12th?
3rd, nope, 12th and 6th do not. So 3rd and 9th. So basically what they're
3rd and
saying,
9th, yeah.
so they're saying if a planet is, now isn't that interesting, because we were just talking about what if that Jupiter were in the 6th and the Mercury and the whatever were in the 9th or whatever, but a weaker good open one is when the planetary significator, remember we're asking, can I get pregnant? Right? 5th house, I'm a seahorse. Can I get pregnant? And weaker open good one is when the planetary significator is in its own domicile or its exaltation. So it could be Mars in Capricorn or in cadence in the 6th house. So that could be your weak open good one if it were the ruler of my 5th house, right? So the weakest open good one is when the planetary significator is in one of its greater dignities or in 2 of its lesser ones, not aspecting the ascendant. So that, of course, would be 6, 8, or 12, or in only 1 of its lesser dignities, aspecting the ascendant. Okay, so things start to get a little bit more. What happens? As it gets weaker, things need to be aspecting the ascendant. That's what we find, right? So when things are just good, when we have the strongest open helper, he just needs to be in the absolute best condition, domicile condition he can be in, right on the minute of the cusp. And it gets weaker as he gets further away. But then if he's not going to be close or within 15 degrees, then he can be in his own house or exaltation or in the 2 lesser ones and be cadent, but he's got to be aspecting the ascendant. So there's got to be a way for him to make contact. Similarly, we get even weaker and he can be in its own domicile or exaltation, two of its lesser dignities, cadence aspecting the ascendant. That's what I just did. But the very weakest one is when he's in his greater dignities or in two of its lesser ones and not aspecting, or in only one. So if you had a planet in its triplicity and it's aspecting the ascendant, that would be your weakest. Okay, so we're going to keep, let's go to some charts here and just work with this for a second. So I thought I would bring in, we didn't do, I had a lot of, I don't think I did any study charts, right? We didn't do study charts. Matter of fact, that was why I was going to do this again, was because we didn't use study charts, and I didn't, right? So we didn't use study charts. So this time we're going to do that. So let's see. So our strongest significator would be if a planet is in its own sign and on an angle. So that would be the first thing we're looking at, right? Now, then it gets weaker if a planet is right on an angle to the minute. Then it gets weaker if he's within a few degrees on either side. But then what we're really thinking about or looking at is these lesser ones, right? Because these lesser ones are if the weaker open good one is if it's in two of its own lesser dignities and an angle by 5 degrees or 15. Now look at the Venus. Is it daytime or nighttime in this chart?
It's daytime chart.
Daytime chart. So Venus is the triplicity ruler of the water.
Yeah.
Okay. And she's within 5 degrees. So hold on a second. Let's see if she's in, what degree is she at? What, 14? Is she in the 14th degree?
Yeah, it's at 14. 13.5.
Okay, she's not the term ruler and she's not the face ruler. If she were the term ruler or the face ruler, she would be this one, the weak open good one, when the planet is in two of its own lesser dignities. She's in her triplicity, but if she were in term and or face, then she would also be this weak open good one. Now she rules what houses, because that's how we know what significator we'd be talking about. She rules the 4th by interception, and she rules the 11th, right? So as far as this particular consideration is concerned, she's got kind of middling strength for 1 being angular and 2 being in her triplicity, but she isn't quite able to be a weak open helper, right? So we're talking about helpers. So this is the distinction. It's just coming to me too. This is the distinction. This is how the planet openly helps it to happen, right? Here we've got a nice angular Venus, which should be helpful, but she's not really an open helper because she doesn't have an extra dignity. So that's how this particular consideration is looking at this Venus. So more ways to just stratify this out. So Arab, just so much kind of a part of this kind of calculating mindset of the Arab Middle East or medieval period. But it's just so fascinating because ultimately it shouldn't make any difference, but it does, right? If a planet is in two of its lesser dignities, it's stronger, certainly by score, right? This gets a score of 3. If she were also, okay, right? Think about this. Cancer, so Moon would get a score of 5 for being in the domicile, right? So just Cancer itself as a domicile gets 5 points. So any planet, so the Moon, when she's in domicile, gets 5 points. If Venus is in term and triplicity, she gets 3 points for triplicity and 2 points for term, which gives her the same amount of points as the Moon, who's the ruler of the sign. That's the difference between this Venus and if the Venus were also in her own term or face. If she were in face as well, she would get 1 point, which would give her 4, which would give her the same as exaltation, as Jupiter. So she would have the same strength as Jupiter in this sign. Do you remember when we when we talked about essential dignity, Remember I was talking about this, about finding what was going on in the 5 dignities and who actually was helping the sign show itself. Hold on a second, let me give you an example. And Louise, where is your, what degree is your moon? Do you know that? What degree your moon, or even just your sun?
Yeah, it's I think it's 16, Leo. Oh, I've got it on my other computer actually.
It doesn't matter.
Can I get back to?
Get back to me.
Can I get back to you?
We're going to use 16 Leo. Okay, we're going to use 16
Yeah.
Leo. But yes, get back to me. So no, okay. So the sun gets
Because I got
5.
it on my. I got a different laptop.
Take your
I got
time.
it on the.
Do it after. Do it after, because when I turn off the recording, we'll have all the time. in the world.
Okay. And
Okay, so-
and also, yeah,
Oh yeah.
cool. I'll post it just so you can use it when you want to.
Okay, thank you. But I just wanted to use one little tiny example. So, but the example I'm using is this. So the sun gets 5 points. Nobody has exaltation. It's daytime, let's say. It is daytime in your chart. So the sun gets another 3 points. That gives the sun 8. Then we're at 16. So that gives Mercury, or rather, it gives Saturn 2 points. It's the second decan, which gives Jupiter 1. So that means that Sun, Saturn, and Jupiter make this sign of Leo work. If the person has Sun and Saturn in connection, if there's a Sun-Saturn aspect or a Saturn-Jupiter aspect, that's going to affect how the sign Leo operates. Am I making sense? Because they're all the planets that rule the sign. So all the planets that have some kind of rulership or participation in that sign, all of a sudden, let me give you another example. Let me do my Venus for a second, because this is a good example. No, it's not a good example. Sorry. I thought it was a little bit, oh, wait, it is stronger. Okay. So Saturn, it's nighttime. So Mercury has 3 points. It's at 14 degrees. So Jupiter has 2, and the decan is second decan. So Mercury has 1. That means Mercury has 4 points and Saturn has 5. That means that Mercury is almost as strong in the degree where Venus is as Saturn is, who is her ruler. I was a musician for a long time, and one of my strengths was being able to sight read perfectly, being able to, and I'm a singer, and most singers were not able to sight read. That's one of the main kind of things. Most singers are not considered really good musicians. I was one of those singers that could sight read almost anything and had excellent rhythm. And so remember, Mercury is reading, writing, and arithmetic. Right? So that's kind of how the Mercury showed up in my Venus. It wasn't just that I was into making pretty sounds or whatever, but I was counting. I did this one score, was the hardest score I've ever done in my life, where there were all kinds of the hardest subdivisions I've ever had to do. I mean, it was math. It was not music. It was pure math. That's the Mercury aspect of my Venus. And so that's kind of the point I'm making, is that I'm kind of digressing, but we're not really following any huge schedule. But that's my point. So when we kind of come to that, but let me go back for just 1 second. So what I would say, so basically what I'm saying is, look, you have that dignities chart. You should be knowing what all of the planets are that rule the sign that you're in, that rule the degree of the sign that you're in. And then you should be looking at who is involved, if any of those planets are involved with each other. For instance, for instance, at 25 Gemini, where my Jupiter is, Saturn, Mercury, and the sun. I have a Sun-Saturn sextile. Do you get it? I have a Sun-Saturn sextile. My Sun-Saturn sextile is affecting how Gemini works. How my Jupiter works specifically. So my Sun sextile is a supporting factor behind how my Jupiter works, because Mercury And what was it? Mercury, Saturn, and the sun are the main rulers of that degree of Gemini. Mercury is obviously the domicile ruler, but then so are the sun and the Saturn involved. And the sun Saturn is actually happening in my chart, 16 degrees Leo. Okay, so same thing. So that's what you would do here with your chart too. So obviously it's sun, it's Saturn, and then it's Jupiter. So you want to see if there's any Sun-Jupiter connection or Jupiter-Saturn connection in your chart. And then that would be how your sun, that would be a supporting thing for how your sun operates. Can anybody else think of a degree, like Diana, can you think of the degree of your of any planet in your chart, or are you looking at it? Or Layla? So I'm gonna go back. Layla, can you think of the degree? Oh wait, what's the degree of your Mars? Isn't it right on the ascendant, like 25 sat or something?
Yeah, it's right on the ascendant with Mercury and Moon.
A second, I gotta get my.
Wait, let me just open my chart here real quick.
Okay, give me 1 second. My battery's running low. I had to move the computer because I should have maybe cut this out when I do the. Okay, sorry. I don't want it stopping on me. All right, so 25. Oh, same as me. So if you have a Sun-Saturn connection, or you have, right, if you have a Sun-Saturn connection, if you have a Mercury-Saturn connection or a Mercury-Jupiter connection, that will be a supporting thing. So that's my point. So Diana, I'm going to go back to what I was talking about. Find a planet in your chart, and we'll do the same thing with yours. We'll come back to it later. Put it in the chat, and I'll come back to it. Oh, great, there it is. Sun 23 Leo, perfect. Okay, so I don't have to come back. So we know, is it daytime? Is it daytime in your chart? Nighttime. Okay, beautiful. So that means it's Sun, Jupiter, Mars, and Mars. So that means, is there a connection between, isn't there a Mars-Jupiter opposition in your chart? Or do you have a Mars-Jupiter connection? I think you've got some kind of Mars-Jupiter connection. Are you the one? It might be someone. Are you the one?
Yeah, I have an opposition.
Yeah, so that opposition is affecting how the sun operates.
Huh.
So that's the point I'm making about it, because now we see the list of all the planets, right? So it's sun, it's nighttime, so it's Jupiter. Mars rules the 25th degree by term, and Mars also rules the third decanate. So if there's a Mars-Jupiter or Mars-Sun or Jupiter-Sun connection, that is going to be a supporting factor for how your sun operates in that particular. So you'll find that with each planet, there's something like that. I mean, it may not be an aspect every time, and so then when you find what house the sun rules, right? Then you can find that, does the sun rule the second house? Because I remember Mars ruled the second house, didn't it?
The sun is in the 6th house.
Oh, okay. So that's interesting. So I don't know if you've ever had heart issues or anything like that. I hope not. But that opposition will affect whatever's going on with the 6th house at some point in your life. So it'd be interesting to sun rules. Oh, that's right, because sun's in Leo, so it rules the 6th house as well.
Wait, you know what? I think I'm mixing that up. Yeah, because I have
he's
Leo
in his own house, right? He's in his own house, right? So, I mean, Cancer could, technically be there, but we'll assume that. I'm going to come back to this, Diana, but this is just something new. I'm kind of slipping in, so I don't know, how the fuck did we get here? I'm sorry, but because we're trying to talk about helpers and that's it. We're talking about helpers and who's a helper and why this planet isn't a helper. Why this Venus isn't really a helper. That's how this whole thing started, right? Because she's only in one dignity. She's not in both, even though she's so close to the angle, right? So finally we come back to the point, right? We finally get back to it. Any other planet that's, look, so we've got a planet that's, but it's daytime though, so it's not her term. It's not her triplicity, but that could have been a possibility. but nothing else. Oh wait, this Jupiter, who's technically 6th house. But he's retrograde, right? The planet has to be direct. Let's go to the next one. Jigster. Okay, so anything? Oh, wait, now this Jupiter, well, this Jupiter could have, but why wouldn't he? Why would this Jupiter not be right? He would be one of the weaker ones, right? He wouldn't be the strongest, right? Because he's not on the exactly on the angle. He wouldn't be the next strongest because he's not between 1 degree and 2 degrees. He wouldn't be the next strongest because he's not 3 degrees before, 5 degrees after. He is within 15 degrees, but why would he not be considered a helper? Jupiter is combust, right? So they have to be in, remember the thing is they all have to be in good condition, right? They can't be impeded. They keep saying received, not impeded in any way. So this Jupiter is impeded by combustion. So it could possibly have worked, but doesn't. But there are look at how the Mars is exalted here, and Mercury, Mars, that's interesting. Saturn up here. So let's look at some of our other stuff. What's advancing here? We've got, well, obviously this stuff is.
Sun,
And
Moon,
so
Jupiter, yeah.
Mercury and Mars.
Mercury.
And so Saturn, but not the Venus,
Saturn.
right?
Yeah.
All right. So all of that, and what are the conjuncties? What are the joinings? We've got Moon, Jupiter. What else?
The Moon.
Applications.
Yeah. But Sun is separating from Jupiter. Mercury is applying to Mars.
Mercury's applying to Mars. Hey, now what's going on with this?
Also Mars and Saturn.
Mars and Saturn, very good. But talk to me about this Moon Jupiter. What's going on with that Moon Jupiter?
All right. This Moon is applying to Jupiter.
But what's special about this application? What's special about this particular?
The Jupiter is between the two luminaries.
The Jupiter is combust. Remember, this is a return of
exactly.
virtue. This is a return of virtue without. Now, technically, now this is where we get into the split hairs of this. This is technically a return of virtue without or with detriment, because both planets are combust. Remember, planet A and planet B are both combust or cadent. This is going on right here. However, the Moon is being received by Jupiter because the Moon's a fine.
1 degree, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, but it's by sign. The reception is by sign here, right? So the Moon is pushing power at Jupiter, right? So Moon is pushing power, which means there's a reception in this conjunction. So does that mean it's with fitness? I would say no, even, right? I mean, I don't know. So that's kind of my point. Is there some weird, like, little things of this where it's like, oh, wait, it says if there's a reception, it's fitness, but here they're both combust. So I would think maybe them both being combust would overcome the fitness, whatever fitness, because they're both combust. So they're both so weak that they can't really overcome the reception. The reception can't really be helpful, is what I would be.
So you're saying that the combustion is strong enough to render any benefits of being in domicile?
Or, well, actually, well, yes, unless the planet is Casimir. I'm starting to have a theory about Casimir. I think that Casimir is the most visible when the planet that's being Casimir is in its own sign or exaltation.
Yeah.
Even though we've got the Oprah Winfrey chart where there's a Casimir Venus that's not. But you know, me and my Ella Fitzgerald thing, right? The Ella Fitzgerald chart where their Casimir Venus is in Taurus. So if there was we just had another chart recently on Reddit where a guy wondered why he had such good luck, and he had a Casimir Jupiter in Pisces
Whoa.
in the second, like right on the second house of
Wow.
Pisces. So and I think I have that chart to show too. So that all of that goes to show, or kind of, if this Jupiter. So to answer your question, I do think yes. Because remember, what I think is happening with combustion is that not only does the sun burn out the other planet, but it takes on the significations of the planet. It pretends to be that planet. It acts as a proxy until the planet gets to the heart of the sun. And then the sun shines through it, is, I guess, what my feeling may be around this, or what I'm understanding, right? So then the power of the sun is behind it and coming through it when it's Casimir. It's just being burned until it gets to the heart, and then when it's in the heart, the sun shines through, and then it goes
okay,
back. So I think yes.
I have a question for you.
What's that?
Let's suppose we're talking Casimir, right? So if this sun was in Leo and this Jupiter was getting Casimir, so the sun is in its own domicile, so it would inflict more harm on the Jupiter?
No, I think what I think would happen is they would both get really strong, because remember a planet that's conjunct a benefic is what is benefited, right? So I think that Jupiter would be hyper beneficial for the sun.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
I think probably no matter what sign, of course, Libra, Aquarius, that kind of thing. But I think because even here, the only planet that's really getting it good, getting a good stroke in this chart of these three is the sun, because the sun's connected to Jupiter.
Yeah, and the moon.
Right? So the sun's with the benefic, and the moon too. But the moon's not that in such great condition. I mean, we want the moon to be in better condition, but she is technically a benefic. But it's really it's really how the Jupiter is helping this sun, right? And,
okay, so let's make this more interesting.
The sun isn't helping Jupiter.
Let's make this more interesting. Yeah, so let's make this more interesting. Suppose this was Aries, and it was sun in exaltation, and it was Mars within 1 degree of the sun and combust.
Well, remember, Mars and the sun are similar in nature. Mars and the sun are both hot and dry planets. So that's kind of like Jupiter and Venus are too much of a good thing. Sun and Mars are too much of a bad thing in that way. Too much heat, too much aggression, too much needing to be first, too much needing to be in the spotlight, too much that kind.
That's
right?
what I was thinking. That's where my head was going, because they're both sun's in exaltation, Mars is in domicile, and if there's combustion going on, that's too much heat.
The heat, it would be overwhelming heat, which could maybe tucker out Mars. Like think about a runner getting heat stroke, so it could be that kind of thing where the exertion,
beautiful analogy,
right? Because Mars is action, right? So it could be too much exertion, too much. It's interesting that because my chart for moving into this apartment has a Mars Sun conjunction in Libra, thankfully. And it's kind of on my natal midheaven. And so there's been a lot of activity towards it, and and too much of something that I didn't really need, and not it has really this Mars, but there's been a lot of me kind of wanting to get active towards this thing and get my thing off the ground and get so that has been showing itself definitely. So and we're just finishing with this Mars Sun conjunction. It's still going on. I mean, it's Mars is, I think it's about 13 degrees now, but finally they're leaving proximity of each other. But it's been a long time. And then we had the Mercury going and going to the Mars, and the Mars going to the Saturn, and the Mercury getting besieged by the Mars and Saturn 2 days ago, and it's been crazy. Okay, let's go to
tell me about it.
It's been crazy. Let's go to the next chart. So Kiakli. Okay, so there's Mercury. Look. Mercury. The Mercury would do it. He's far enough away from the Mars, and he's close enough away from the Venus.
Yeah.
So this Mercury would be, it's within 2 degrees. So this is a stronger secret helper, or open helper rather, not a secret helper. This is a stronger open helper.
Hmm.
And if I'm not mistaken, I thought that there was some kind of thing for if a planet were, here it is, the weak open good one is when the planet is in 2 of its own lesser dignities in an angle by 5 degrees or 15 after, or if it is in its own domicile or exaltation in a succedent to an angle, which we also have. The Jupiter. Where the fuck? Yes, so so notice the Jupiter is in its exaltation in a succedent house. So we've got a strong open helper. So the Mercury first and fifth house. Now it should help, shouldn't it? But notice how this is not a fertile sign, and neither is this. But we got Venus there. And remember, what are the houses that we look for planets to promise children? 1, 10, 11, and 7. Which are the planets that promise children? Mercury, Venus, Moon, and Jupiter. And the ruler of the 5th.
Yeah,
Mercury.
that's
So I think this chart should be able, just to check let's see, because this could be, once again, it could be one of those kinds of charts where the person doesn't get around to it. Notice that the ruler of the moon is also in Gemini. All this stuff is in Gemini. So we talked last week about Gemini and puer, not mature, and the lack of maturity. So basically, puer and senex. Puer is the youth, senex is the old. So puer is Mercury, senex is Saturn. So that's where this idea of Mercury signs being sterile, because the maturity, right? Virgo is the virgin, right? And Mercury rules children and young people, youth. So let's look and see where the part of children is, just since it's pointing to the fifth house, since this helper is pointing to the 5th. And he's really helping because he's with the Venus. I think that this conjunction can overcome any sterility, but let's look for the part of children. So it's daytime, Jupiter to Saturn, back 30, forward 2, back 30, forward 2. So that's 3 degrees of Taurus. Look at that. Ruler of the 5th house is with the rule of the part of children. It should work. I think that even though we've got the sterile signs here, we've got the two planets in the 1st house. That even though, look, we've got the 2 other planets that say no in there too.
yeah.
Right.
So like mixed significations, where we said that when
there might be
yeah.
There should be issues. It should not necessarily be easy, but it is and look at how the sun is on the part of children. And I don't like the sun for children, and I don't like the sun for the 7th house either usually. But
of course.
But Mercury and Venus, I think they can make that. They can kind of make that happen. But look at how those 2 are there too. That's really interesting. Okay, so that's our strong open helper that we are, or our strongish open helper that we're working with. Okay, who's next? Let's look at Luna Sagan. All right. The Saturn could have done it, maybe. If he'd been closer. Nobody else really can. Nobody in this chart. Right? There's only one, right? Because really what we're looking for is domicile almost completely, right? Or we're looking for, it gets weaker as we get into, as we start including exaltation, it gets weaker. And then our last chart, so this one doesn't have any of those. Oh, Malopoli. This is a client of mine. And she's also on this. Okay, well, look at the Jupiter. Well, so this Jupiter might be considered one of those weak open helpers, because he's in his
Yeah.
own sign in a succeeding house. I mean, we're not really looking at him that too much, but notice but not, right? Because of the square to
Yeah.
Mars. So this is
Hey,
why, yeah.
yeah. Do you have any charts of people who've had like many children so we could see the significations?
Let me come back to you. Matter of fact, let me come back to you about that next week.
Okay.
Oh,
Okay. Done.
but I do have a chart. I have a chart of someone who had 3 children. Is that a good one? Is that a good one?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. Works. Because I want to see, something. I mean, whatever charts we have done, we've seen mixed significations or we have seen no significations for children at all. I don't think we've done one where we see someone who's had, more than one child.
Yeah. So this person has had 3 children.
Okay.
Okay, this is Judy Garland, who was Dorothy in The Wizard of Oz, and she
Yeah,
had 3
yeah.
children. And she had 3
Okay.
children. Why?
Okay, first of all, we see first 7, 10th, and 11th. Nothing there. Then we see
First, wait. First,
first Venus. Oh yeah, the ruler of the 5th is in first.
and what kind of sign is she in?
Cancer.
Which
Yep.
is what kind of sign? Fertile, right? So we got a
Fertile,
ruler of the 5th, fertile in the
ruler
first house.
first house.
And Venus is one of the planets who promises children.
Promises children.
Right. And so here's the thing also. What's also interesting about it is, so Mars is the natural ruler of the 5th, right? Look at that Mars Sun opposition. So she put her children through a lot of bullshit because of her money problems. Look at this Mars Sun opposition. Because of her money problems, despite, okay, remember when we talked about the significator for substance is not the 2nd house ruler? It's actually usually the first thing you look at is the ruler of the part of fortune.
Part of fortune.
See, so
or the exaltation ruler of the part of fortune.
And with the Jupiter, right?
Yeah.
So keep thinking about these things. With the Jupiter, with the Mars, with the Saturn, squared by the Mars, opposed by the Saturn. Those things are always telltale signs of whether it's being helped or hindered, right? So not only is the significator in a sign of exaltation, but it's with Jupiter who can enlarge it, but then also with this unpredictable Rahu, right? So we can see big money can come into this chart, but then from the 2nd house, we can see then have no idea what the fuck they're doing with it.
Yeah, exactly.
No, and that was exactly, basically when she finds out, in her, I don't know, in the early 40s or like in her late 30s, early 40s, in the late 50s, that she's broke. And she's been living, she was a Hollywood star, been living like living in palace-y type places and living.
And it's in the house of self-undoing.
House of self-undoing. Yes, it is. Thank you. And so the children went through all this instability, thinking they were going to get having to fend off the landlord. Liza Minnelli, taking care of her when she was on a drug binge or when she was on an alcohol binge. So all of the crazy shit that went along with being Judy Garland's child. So we can see the fertility from the cusp of the 5th and the planet that rules it, but we can also see the bullshit that the kids went through from the opposition of the Sun Mars.
Yeah.
Right. And so, and you can see some of it too, not really, and we can also see that there would be a famous child from the first triplicity of the 5th house is children. So that it's daytime, it would be Saturn. So we have an exalted child.
We do.
So Liza Minnelli also becomes a famous person and won an Oscar when the mother didn't. Judy Garland never won an Oscar. Liza Minnelli won. And a Tony. I think Liza Minnelli won the Tony, Oscar, and an Emmy. I think she's one of those people that have won all 3. So, so even not a more exalted, because not as famous as Judy Garland, but certainly as celebrated as her. So there's a chart for you of a person. So let's do our thing then. We're looking for strong secret helpers. We don't really have any, do we? We don't really have any. the Saturn, is the Saturn within 15 degrees? No, well, 13, 17 degrees. So not really.
Yeah,
The
Mercury
Saturn,
is at 8 before ascendant, but it's retrograde, so it's not a helper, right?
and it's in, but and it has to be in domicile or exaltation.
Yeah,
Remember, so,
yeah.
so that's also an important factor. So we really only have one planet who could have been doing it in this chart, and that's the Saturn. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to go back to the sheet, or back to our text, and we're going to go to the next consideration. But this was just something I wanted to bring back up so that we could look at it. And we'll just look, the next considerations are kind of easy, and we can combine them with what we have been doing, or they're basically more philosophical. But Diana, when we talked about this last week, this consideration is about the moon. So this is number 10, I think. The 9th consideration is that you know that the moon has a similarity with inferior generated things, namely to the kinds of genera and the individuals of kinds. So what they're basically saying, they're basically kind of expostulating this concept that superior beings, or as above, so below, superior beings have an effect on inferior, superior bodies have an effect on inferior bodies, and the moon being the closest, but still being a superior body, but being the closest to the earth, she's this, what's the word I use all the time? She's the transmitter. She's this transmitter, and so she transmits the influence from the celestial realm to us. And so in this particular consideration, he basically says what it is I've been trying to figure out. Because my whole feeling around the moon has been, and it's been based on kind of rediscovering Bonatti, and it's based on what he says here. Oh wait, no, I'm further, no, it's up further. Here it is. Whence the moon is always to be put as a significatrix of every, no, it's even before that, right? Is it? No. Yeah. Whence the moon is always to be put as a significatrix of every matter and every beginning and every nativity. Get that? Wrap your head around this. Whence the moon is always to be put as a significator of every matter, every beginning, and every nativity. And her good condition is the good condition of every matter. Excuse me, every matter. And her bad condition is the bad condition of every matter. And it is her virtue alone, and only her power, that even if the Lord of the Ascendant or another signification of some matter were impeded, excuse me, indeed, so that it could not do or perfect what it ought, and she, the moon, were found to be strong, nevertheless the matter will be perfected. Now that's how we do horary charts, right? We don't really primarily look to see if the ruler of the first and the ruler of, if it's the 5th house and children, if they're coming together. That would be nice, but we really are looking to see if the moon does it, right? If we're talking horary. What he's saying is that it doesn't matter what kind of chart you're dealing with. The moon is the moon. And so how we've looked at it, and I myself am guilty of it, how we've looked at it from this modern perspective as like our emotions, our inner self, that is a major, like a discredit to the moon practically. Because the moon is how everything in the chart works. Now, one of the things that I have noticed is I've noticed quite a few charts where a person writes in and says, nothing is going well, but the moon is in Cancer. And I've thought to myself, what is that about? And I wonder if that's something, if that's about, now I haven't looked, I hadn't been necessarily looking from this particular way and all of the things that make it fucked up or whatever, but I was looking and thinking, okay, how is it that this moon in good condition is screwing things, is allowing things to be screwed up, allowing things to not happen? And so it could be that the moon is strong enough to make all the bad things happen too, right? So it's this, I think, I guess need to be thinking of what's the magnetic pull of the moon in the chart. Does it pull us towards fucking things up? Right, because it's what's alive within us, right? So does that mean that, because there's certain people, we all know people who can't get their fucking life together. Can't get it together. A matter of fact, I was just on a call right before this with one, and a wonderful person, can't get it together, can barely say a sentence that's coherent sometimes. Smart as fuck, but can't get it. That's the moon. That's the moon. That's the problem with the moon. It's affected everything. He's, and he's older than I am. He's probably 5 or 6 years older than I. Have a penny to his name. Never really could hold down a job. Maybe the moon is involved with some of the. We know people who can't hold a job down, who can't get it together, who maybe have gone in and out of dealing, liminal, have gone into kind of liminal circumstances. Maybe drug abuse even. I mean, I don't know. I'm really just pushing things out here, but I really do want to investigate whether or not how important the moon is in a natal chart for how everything works. My moon is void of course. Things go fallow in my life. Like I get really gangbusters started and then let things just go. That is kind of how void of course works in a horary chart. You see, so if we're looking at these things, if we're looking at the import of the moon as fortuna, as lady luck, as fate, as fortune, as how the dice get rolled, snake eyes, ooh, double six, that's the moon, right?
Yeah.
So when we're looking at it that way, then we're looking to see, how much mojo does this chart have to make what it wants happen? Or how distracting, how much of the moon is a distraction? Or is there a way that the moon is distracting them from having things? We've got someone in here who has like a moon that's kind of debilitated. And so we know that the moon can be a distraction for that person, right? It can distract them from what they can really do, from their confidence and their ability. It can separate them from those things. And so when we feel separated from some of those things, then often we're impotent. So there's an issue. So that's really my question, is this issue around the moon and potency, and the general potency of the chart. Does the chart have the potency to make anything happen? And how much does the moon have to say about that? Now, I don't want to put oversized emphasis on it, because I also think reception and return of virtue have something to do with this now. So we're going to move on from that. So basically, and then he was talking about what the moon, so remember we were talking last week about, this is so interesting. So we're talking about how he mentioned this tyrant, Ezzolino da Romano. And Ezzolino da Romano was an astrologer. He was into astrology, and he kept an astrologer on retainer. And because he was this raving tyrant, he had these arbitrary understandings of astrology that he forced his astrologer to adopt. And so
we talked about it last week.
Okay, so we talked about that. This is mostly for Diana's sake. And it seemed to certain people that she herself always does that. What he's talking about is translation of light for the moon. So this is continuing where we just stopped, right? So even if the Lord of the Ascendant is in a screwed condition, the moon can still make things happen. For she is the governess of all matters and is the bearer of the virtues of all the planets. I'm going to repeat that. That's really important for what's coming next. She is the bearer of all the virtues, of all of the planets. Wait, was that? Is the bearer of the virtues of all the planets toward planets. So, in other words, a planet gives her virtue, and then she gives it to somebody else. That's how she transmits. Namely one to the other. Indeed, since she receives the disposition of one planet and carries it away to another. That's translation. That's how the moon translates light. And it seemed to certain people that she herself always does that. And so Ezelino de Romano says that she just does it, period. When she is separating from one planet, she receives its virtue and carries it to another and commits it to the one which she encounters first. That's how we understand translation of light, period. This is a specification, it seems, for the moon. And it seemed to certain people that Saul, who's Persian, had said the same thing. But Saul's intention was not absolute, for he believed that the moon would carry what was committed to her, and if it was not committed to her, she would not carry anything to any other planet. What's he talking about? Reception. For the moon, when she is joined to some planet who receives her, then the planet commits its disposition to her, and she carries it with her and commits it to the one whom she first encounters in one of its own strengths, and not to another. This is important. According to this, a planet does not give something in a place in which it promised nothing. So what he's basically saying is that reception is key to whether or not the moon is translating light. Let's go to a chart, just to any arbitrary old chart, and see if we've got anything going here. This is Judy Garland, and there isn't. So what we have here is we've got a mutually applying opposition between Mercury and Moon. You see it? 2910 to 008. It's out of sign, but I'm giving this one because they're mutually applying. Now, Mercury is in the sign of Moon. So this technically means that if the moon had another planet, let's say the moon had something at 1 degree, she would technically, and let's say it were Saturn in Capricorn right here, she would technically give Saturn Mercury's virtue because Mercury is in her sign. Okay, I'm going to go to another chart. I'm just going to go through charts here for a second to kind of get this point in. Okay, so the moon is in Sagittarius. She's at 11. The last aspect the moon did was 7 degrees of 7 degrees to the sextile of Saturn. Now, remember, a planet that's in its own sign can receive anyone, but ultimately there's no real reception. The moon's not pushing power, she's not pushing nature. So we can't really say he is in his own sign. So we could say that since he's in his own sign, he was in. So this is where the confusion around some of this can come. So because he's in his own sign, he could have actually committed his virtue to her. And she can technically commit his virtue to Jupiter because Jupiter is in Saturn's sign. But otherwise, technically, this would not be able to translate. Right? So technically, by what he's saying, there's no real reception. I mean, there is because when a planet aspects a planet in its own sign, that planet will receive them. But it's not the kind of reception we've been dealing with, whereas there's some kind of exchange. If the moon were in Aquarius and Saturn were in Sagittarius, that would be our perfect reception. Right? Or if the moon were in, or actually what does work is this Jupiter, the moon to Jupiter, because the moon's pushing power to Jupiter. So that one would work. So that means if she were separating from the moon, from Jupiter, and there were Mars here at 29 Aries. Here, yeah, 29 Aries, and that was her last application. She would then give Jupiter to Mars. But that's only because 1, she was being received by Jupiter, and 2, Mars was in his own sign. The example I just gave you is me riffing off of what he said, but not using what he said. I'm basically saying, hey, Saturn's in his own sign. Technically, that means he's receiving any planet that comes into contact with him, which means that he's going to give them his virtue, which means then even though Jupiter isn't really dignified, he's in the sign of Saturn, who just gave her his virtue. So I think we got to have some common sense around this, and not just to the letter. But it's a very interesting thing to think about, that the moon doesn't just translate light. Let's just look at another one, see if there's one where there's nothing happening at all. Here's that one about my book. Oh, okay. So at 7, okay. At 7, Moon would have been pushing nature at Saturn because she's in his exaltation. So Moon has separated from Saturn, who has given her his virtue. What's her next application? That's hilarious. It's Jupiter. It's exactly what we were talking about, but the moon's in a different sign, which makes it a good example, which makes this an actually good example. Now, except Jupiter is not in his own sign, or he's not in a dignity, but he's in the sign of the planet that just gave her virtue. She's not going to not give it to him, is my feeling. That's why I'm saying there's got to be some kind of common sense around this. And it can't just be specifically that. And notice, we've all just been ignoring it and doing Ezzolino da Romano. So for the past, 1700 years, 1800 years, Ezzolino da Romano has prevailed. And we've just been looking at the moon in the way that he says is not necessarily maybe correct. Something to think about. But maybe the way to think about it is kind of the way of thinking about reception. That's when it's the strongest. That's when it's the most efficacious. That's when it's the most effective, right? Is when the moon is separating from a planet who has received her or who she's receiving, and then moving to another planet in its own dignities. Remember, planets in dignities can produce, right? Planets in debility, planets in retrograde, planets combust can't produce. That was where I was with that whole thing with the guy that had the Libra on the 9th house and Venus combust in Virgo, right? It's not producing. Do something different. Okay, so let's go back to Bonatti. So that's our kind of us looking. We'll continue with this because the next two are kind of easy. They're basically him talking about the benefics and the malefics. So here he talks about the malefics. Saturn is malefic because of excessive cold, Mars because of excessive heat, and not that either of them is in truth hot or cold, but they have that in their virtue, and it is in their effect, right? So Mars, we get hot-headed, we get angry, hot under the collar. Saturn, we get cold and distant and detached, right? And because they signify evil and detriment and impediment in matters, unless the malefics were to receive the significator or the moon by domicile or exaltation. Reception, again, because why? Reception removes evil, right? By section or by two of the lesser dignities, or the malefics themselves were significators, because then they hold back all their malice from him whom they receive, nor do they impede him from whatever aspect they were to aspect, better, however, from a trine aspect or a sextile. If they did not receive, their malice is made greater, and all the more strongly if they were to aspect from the opposition or a square aspect. So what he just said was, if there's reception, even the opposition isn't so bad, right? He didn't rule out the opposition. He said, because then they hold back all their malice from him whom they receive, nor do they impede him from whatever aspect. But better if it's a trine or sextile, obviously. But if there is no reception, then especially the opposition and square are going to be difficult. So that's important. So once again, so keep looking for these things. And for example, the trine aspect or a sextile, even if without reception, they will impede less. So I like these because it really kind of breaks down first of all, what it means for this planet to be malefic, how they screw things up, and when it's mitigated, how and when it can be mitigated. Even if without reception, they will then impede less, trine or sextile. However, Saul seems to want to say, good old Saul, right, that the malefics hold back their own malice if they were to aspect by a trine or sextile aspect, but his intention was that they impede less. So once again, he's doing the same thing with Saul that he did with the moon, where he says, hey, Saul seems to say this, but what he really means to say is this. He did not, however, say that their malice would be held back entirely, which of course it would not. Okay, so now we come to the benefics, and so I'm coming down here for they imprint with their own temperament, and we talked about, this is how we started, and they always strive to help what is their own and not their own with success, whether they receive or not, right? So with the malefics, reception is key to keeping them under control. Here, whether they receive or not, they're going to try to help. And if they are receiving, or if there is any kind of reception, all the better. And if they're trine aspect or a sextile aspect, all the better. Okay. Then he goes into the view of the sun. And I thought what he had to say about that, of course, was what we already know on some level. The corporal conjunction is evil, because then he is said to burn up and make unfortunate every star, unless the star were in Kazmimi, right, which is Kazimi of the sun. But then it is in the heart of the sun, and every star in the heart of the sun is made strong. So once again, the corporal conjunction, but we also know the opposition is to view the sun and things signified by him, because he is said to be a benefic, and that is namely by aspect, by whatever sort of aspect it was, unless it is by the opposition, right? So we had also seen that the square was supposedly bad. Here he's saying the opposition and the conjunction are really bad. But we definitely know the opposition and the conjunction are negative. And then also we've got Mercury and the moon. Oh, so this we kind of clarified last week. 14th consideration is to look at Mercury and the moon and to see to which of the planets they are conjoined. So I want, if you have your chart, if your chart is open now, or if you're looking at your chart, or if you have it memorized, think about this now. So remember, conjoin means applying. So it really is only if Mercury or the moon are applying to any planet, because they signify what that planet does. For they are of a convertible nature. In other words, what he's saying is that Mercury and the moon turn into whatever planet they're with. They become that planet. Will I repeat it?
Yeah.
Do you want me to repeat what I read or repeat what I said?
What you said.
Okay. Okay, so what he says is because Mercury and the moon are convertible, are mutable and convertible, they signify, they take on the signification of that planet. They become that planet. You remember when we talked about Mercury and how he's a neuter, he's a hermaphrodite, and he's a male planet with male planets, and he's a female planet with female planets? That's exactly what they're referring to. That's what they're referring to. Same thing with the moon. I used to talk about the moon and how the moon was like Grauman's Chinese theater in Los Angeles. And that's where the Walk of Fame is, where people put their handprint into cement and their footprint into cement. And that's the moon, because you imprint it and then it reflects it back. And so that's basically how the moon gets imprinted by the planet she's with, and how Mercury converts into the planet he's with, into the nature. They don't turn into the planet, they convert into the nature of those planets. So if Mercury is with a hot and dry planet, he becomes hot and dry, so does the moon. If Mercury's with a masculine planet, he becomes a male, he becomes masculine. If he's with a female planet, he becomes female.
Ah, right.
So
and if he's with both, then he takes signification of both?
Yes, well, the thing is, remember, they're the ones doing the converting. Mercury and the moon are the ones doing the converting, not the other planet.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, got it.
So it's basically the moon and Mercury morphing into what that planet does and how it operates, and assisting / mirroring that behavior or
Oh,
signification.
of course, because they're always either going to be applying or separating. Like they'll mostly be separating, and they're like, okay, yeah, I got it.
I think it's also because they're very fast, right? They both
Very
represent
fast. Yeah,
speed
that's
and
what I
changeability.
meant.
So they're
Yeah.
changing quickly, right? So moon represents changeability, and both of them represent mutability and changeability. And so because of that, they change into what they're touching.
Right. Right.
They convert into what they're touching, what they're in connection with. Now, this is conjoined. Once again, he's saying conjoined, which makes sense, right? It needs to be an applying aspect because that's the active aspect. What do we call planets that are separating? Disregard, right? They're not going to be taking on the aspect of that necessarily when they're in disregard. It's really when they're conjoining is what he's saying. 15th is to consider the ways in which planets imprint onto inferior things, one good, the other bad. That's literally the whole thing. And then, so then we talked about when planets are impeded. A planet is not said to be impeded by a malefic unless the malefic projects its rays upon his rays, according to the quantity of the orbs of their light. They're talking about moiety. After it projects its ray, okay, and so basically what he's saying, it's impeded. Remember we talked about this. So this is basically him talking about how soon can we consider a planet to be separating from another planet. Remember this from last week? And he was talking about 1 minute. So he says, Saul says after the planet leaves the degree, which is what I've been using. But Bonatti says he thinks it's after 1 minute, and he has 2 examples of why he thinks it's correct. As an example of this, so moreover, he will induce greater fear. Okay, wait, let me just come earlier. And Saul said that after the malefic planet were to transit the planet whom it was impeding by 1 full degree, the planet is said to be freed from that malefic by 1 full degree. So that's even more than what I'm doing. I'm basically saying once the planet leaves the degree, then it's over. He's saying by 1 full degree. So if you got 2 planets that are exact at 1208, once the other planet gets to 1308, they're done. But to me, says Bonatti, it seems that after the malefic has transited him by 1 minute, the planet may have said to be freed and to have escaped, because the malefic cannot introduce anything after that unless it is fear. Moreover, he will introduce greater fear when he has transited him by only 1 minute than when he has transited him by 1 degree. So what he's saying is, if it's a malefic, what the residue of a malefic is fear. The residue of a benefic is hope. When you have applying, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen, it's gonna happen. Oh shit, it didn't happen. Oh, I'm okay. When it's separating, it's oh shit, I'm in the clear. But if it's really close, it's, am I in the clear yet? Am I in the clear yet? They don't see me, they don't see me. Can I get out of here? Can I get out of here? That's 1 minute away. 30 minutes away, oh, okay, they've gone around the corner. Let me try to get to that next spot. A degree away, they're in the next county, and I'm now on a boat trying to get away. With a benefic, is it going to happen? Is it going to happen? It's going to happen. It's going to happen. When it's separated is, oh, I hope it's going to happen. I hope it's going to happen, but it doesn't. And the hope is strong. And we get further away, 30 minutes. Oh, well, I thought maybe it might happen. I'll still hold out hope. And then a degree away, fuck it, right? So that is where Bonatti is coming in. His examples are of a guy in battle who is exposed and captured, pose the question whether or not he would return safe and sound from the fight or not. And the ascendant was Gemini. Mercury was in Aquarius at 7, joined to Saturn. And Mercury was joined to Saturn's the ruler of the 8th in this chart. Okay, so 8th is terror and fear and trauma and, and murder and death. So he basically wants to know, am I going to live through this war, right? And so, or am I going to die? And so there's this conjunction, this trine between the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the 8th. And not a trine. They're both in Aquarius. So there's a conjunction between the ruler of the ascendant and the ruler of the eighth, and it's separated. So 7 degrees 54, 7 degrees 53. Mercury was separating from Saturn already by 1 minute. Therefore, it seemed that he ought to have died in the battle on account of the conjunction with Mercury was making with Saturn in the 8th degree of Aquarius, whence he was in danger of death and feared as though with the ultimate fear, and believed he would be killed by enemies. And he said, and he had been pursued by them, so that it did not seem that he would be able to escape. And often they had their hands on him. Ultimately, however, he escaped from them. I mean, that's outrageous, after practically losing hope, because he did not believe he could escape. And this happened to him because of Mercury, who had already been separated from Saturn. Okay, so that's his. Now, the other one is if a planet is safe. So that's the opposite of impeded, is safe. So a planet is impeded if he's in some kind of negative aspect to the malefics. A planet is safe if he is in some kind, if he's not impeded by the malefics and he's receiving some kind of aspect to the benefics. Notice he has an example, and what he says here is same thing. After it is transited him by 1 minute, it is not perfected, nor does the matter send anything to him but hope, just as a malefic does not send anything but fear, as I said. And the hope which the benefic gives is such that the querent believes that the matter will be perfected for him, and it seems to him that it is settled concerning the perfection of his matter, not, however, without rendering of some kind of doubt. For example, a certain question was posed concerning a certain business deal, whether the matter would be perfected or not. Ascendant was Scorpio, Mars was at 12 degrees Taurus, Venus at Capricorn, 12 degrees 14, Mars at 12, 13. And truly Venus was joined to Mars by a trine aspect, and she was receiving him from her own domicile, and Mars receiving her from his exaltation. And it seemed to the querent and to all those handling the business deal that it ought to have been perfected on account of the aspect of full friendship. And they stood fast in their hope until Venus transited the aspect of Mars by 1 full degree. In the end, however, the matter was destroyed on account of the fact that Venus had already transited Mars by 1 degree by the time the question was made. So that's when we think about what's going on with that stuff, that's what's going on. So when we think about separation, how separated are people? How separated is separated? And I mean, it's just something to be thinking. Nowadays, what we tend to see is that most people use aspects, use orbs for aspects. As we know, planets had orbs, not the aspect. But now we're talking about what really constitutes a distance in separation. What constitutes the actual, when do we actually say that something has separated? Okay, so with all that stuff in mind, let's just look at some charts. Let's go back to Anacom, to the front, to the beginning, and let's just do like a full thing. What's advancing, what's applying, all that stuff. So what's advancing? I see Mercury and the Sun are advancing. Technically, so is Mars, but he's relatively close. Venus is advancing. Oh, this was the one that had that Venus in triplicity, and but not enough to be a helper. Moon is advancing. Saturn is advancing.
I don't see the chart. Did you?
Oh, you don't? I'm sorry. I didn't push the screen share probably. Sorry about that. You see it now?
No? Yes, now I do.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, so Venus is advancing. She's within 5 degrees of the ascendant. Mercury is obviously advancing. He's in the 11th. The Sun, Mars technically. Moon is definitely right on the cusp of the 4th. And then Saturn in the 4th, very close to the cusp of the 5th, and not the Jupiter. What houses do those planets rule? So especially the Moon and Venus, what houses do those planets rule? Moon is the ruler of the ascendant. Venus is the ruler of the 11th. And she's the ruler of what else? Fourth by what do we call interception? Okay, so that's unfortunately that's not a good, unfortunately, a good sextile. It was, right? It's not a good sextile because it is separating. But what is not separating? Interesting. Not a lot of good separations in this chart, or there's almost no applications in this chart, are there? There is no application in this chart. Oh, yes, there is. Mars to Jupiter. Technically, Sun to Mars. Mars to Jupiter, though. That's the only one. There's only this Mars-Jupiter opposition. And guess what? It's a return of virtue. It's a return of virtue in two ways. It's a return of virtue because this Jupiter is retrograde, but this Jupiter is also cadent. Now, Mars is not quite close enough to be cadent. Isn't that interesting? This opposition has no reception. I mean, Jupiter is in his own sign. Oh, now here's the thing. Jupiter is in his own sign, so should receive any planet. But remember, Mars is his enemy. Jupiter and Mars are enemies. So I find that the Mars-Jupiter opposition tends to be pretty malefic because of the enemy status that they have. And here also we've got this return of virtue. Is the Mars strong enough to go it alone without the Jupiter here, is the question. Technically, there would be some kind of reception since Jupiter is in his own sign, but because of the retrograde and the cadency, and the possible, he's not cadent. We'll say he isn't, but he would be cadent by whole sign. By whole sign, these two would both be cadent, and so that would be, in my opinion, a return with detriment, which means that the houses that those two planets are involved with will have issues. Those houses are the 10th, and notice it's the 10th, the 5th, the 6th. So, and look at how the rule of the part of fortune is, how part of fortune is in Scorpio too, and the part of fortune. So, and the substance for this person. So, and money matters for this person. This Mars, Jupiter, this is the only applying aspect. And look at how important all the stuff involved with it is. So we have an impediment because Jupiter is being opposed by Mars without reception. Remember, we just went through all that rigmarole. If there is a blah, 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 and there's reception, then the malice will be abated. If there has not been any reception, then especially the opposition and the square will be negative. This is especially going to affect the Jupiter badly. So the 10th house, mother, don't forget 10th house is also mother, possibly. So it could be mother, it could also be their career, public life, and then the 6th house of illness. So it could actually color the kind of illness that the person gets. Okay, so every single chart, obviously every single chart is so different, but every single chart has a completely different applicatory profile. And so it gets me more and more, I don't want to say peeved, but yeah, it does. It peeves me a little bit more and more when I'm on Reddit and people are like, oh, I have this square and I have that, blah, blah, blah. And I have 12 squares and I have 14, trines or whatever. And it's like, oh, well, you really only have one applying aspect in this whole chart. And nobody has any idea or thinks about it, but it's so different. It's so important. And it, like I said, it pulls the narrative out of the chart. It pulls the narrative out of the chart to be looked at. Okay, so that's a very important part. And we talked about that. And we talked about, what else did we look at? Oh, let's look at the moon. Layla, what do you think about the moon in this chart?
Okay, it's in Virgo, and is it applying somewhere? Wait, let me just see. Is the Mercury trining the moon? No,
Mercury
it's separating. No, it's
separating, yeah.
separating. Yeah. Well, to me, it looks like it's void of course.
The moon? Okay,
Yeah,
so
I think so.
so that's an impediment, right? So that's an impediment.
Yeah, I don't think it's applying anywhere.
Okay, so void of course, right? That is one of the, what do they call,
Yeah.
they call that. Yeah, so that's one of those things about the moon. So
Yeah.
so that's a so then, so of course, then the question is, what are the implications for this chart with the void of course moon? How would it affect everything, right? If the moon is the significatrix of everything, how is
Yeah.
this going to affect her? Or does it? So that's, I mean, it's kind of a rhetorical question, but can you glean
Exactly.
anything? But hold on one second. All right. So that, I think, so that was it with the moon. We saw that impediment there. Is there anything that's got the safety thing that they talked about that basically has some kind of good aspect from but remember, we've only got one applying aspect in this chart, right? We've only got the Mars Jupiter applying aspect in this chart.
Yeah.
So that's, we've only got that one thing going. All right, let's get another chart up and see that. And the other thing we're looking for is but we already did that with them. We already did where we looked for the helper. We looked for the open helper. So we've already done, that's right. We've done that with these charts. So let's do everything else. So the moon and Jupiter and sun are advancing. The Mars and the Mercury are advancing. The Saturn is advancing. And it looks like we've got a Mars-Saturn sextile and a Mercury-Saturn sextile. And a Mercury is going. So I like that Mars-Saturn sextile, because look at how Mars is not just exalted, so pushing power, right? Remember, when planet A is in his own sign or exaltation and applying to any planet, they are pushing power. And so here, in this particular case, Mars is pushing power because he's exalted, but he's also pushing virtue because he's in Saturn's domicile. So in my opinion, this sextile is particularly strong. It's almost as strong as a mutual reception. This is my point about, not all aspects, not all sextiles are created equal. A sextile between Venus and Moon, Venus in Cancer and Moon in Taurus, is going to be really different from a sextile between Venus and Gemini and Moon in Leo. Right? Not just because of the signs they're in, but because there's no reception. That's my point. And so once again, if you remember how we started this, which was with Ana Luisa's fantastic question, which was what's more important, the signs, the houses? What are we looking at? And I said, as far as the importance of the signs are concerned, what we're really looking for importance-wise is reception. That's where it matters, because Mars is in the sign of Saturn and applying to him, which means there is a sextile with reception. We know that reception does two things: removes evil and helps to guarantee perfection. So what houses are being affected? The 10th, the 9th, the 8th, the 6th, the 11th. So this person should do, I'm hoping this person should do pretty well in life. Look at also how the sun is with Jupiter, whose sun rules what? Rules the 4th house. I think this person might be doing pretty well in life. Might be. Who's the ruler of look at that. Okay, so part of fortune is Gemini. Mercury is pushing nature at Saturn. So remember, the term I use is pushing nature by blah, blah, blah. Right? So this is perfect. This is good. This is good. What we don't like is the fact that, we don't dislike it, because Mercury is also pushing nature at Mars, because Mercury is in the exaltation of Mars. So I don't generally like Mars-Mercury conjunctions, but this one might not be so bad. It's not going to be great. They're not generally great, but this one is useful. This one's going to be useful. Much more. It'll be very utilitarian. And look at how, and look, it's with the Saturn in Pisces. Pisces is the fall of Mercury. So there's going to be something interesting about kind of how this connection, this system connects. And once again, it's 10, 9, 8, 6, and 11, right? So it's sextile is between 10 and 11. Well, I mean, 11 by God, I keep forgetting the word. By what is it when you're intercepted? Yeah, so 11 by interception. But Jupiter is the natural ruler of the 11th, or the true ruler of the 11th, and look at what's going on with him. He's combusted. But the intercepted ruler, and look, you also have, okay, so maybe I take it back, because you've also got the South Node here. So maybe dreams don't come true quite like the way we're thinking. Or maybe we have to work really hard, put a lot of effort into it. Right? So Jupiter, maybe we have, maybe we've got expectations of big things that happen easily, and actually I end up having to do all this damn work to get it to happen. I think it feels more like that, right? So remember we talked about how I kept seeing people with combusted Venuses asking about being famous all the time, or combusted Mercury or Venus. Like combustion almost always tended to show some kind of delusional grandeur. And so I think that's what's going on with this chart. Look, the moon's involved too. So this person might be very invested with their dreams. It's also very invested in relationships, very invested with their dreams, and with their, what their kind of their dream that they want. But we talked about K2 and dissatisfaction. And then we also know that the Jupiter is combust, so it can't, and that goes to your question, Layla, about can the combustion cancel out the domicile, which I think it kind of can. But then we have this. This is really the 11th house, and that's what the person doesn't know. The person thinks that this is the 11th house, all their big ideas and whatever, but then they get into it, and all of a sudden all this nitty gritty takes over, and it may even go in a completely different direction. So you may find that they've got this big poofy dream, and then they start going for it, and they realize, ooh, this doesn't really work, or oh, I'm not really satisfied with this. But this is a seed for something else, start this, and that turns out to be the actual dream type thing. That's what this feels like in this chart. But so this is, once again, this is the formula for doing it, right? This is the formula for breaking things down. All of the reasons that we're looking for these things, what is advancing, what's in conjungi, or what's in translation, it's really so that we can apply the pushing management, which is what houses do these planets rule, which means what areas of life are being affected by this aspect. Okay, so let's move on to anything else. So we've already talked about the combustion of Jupiter, which is unfortunate because it would have made this a relatively strong helper. But the Mars is in good condition, and he's in a reception, and he's with Mercury, who's neutral, but with him, so it's gonna become, hey, so here we have it. Mercury is with Mars. What did they say? A planet that's conjoined to another planet, Mercury or Moon conjoined to a planet, become like that planet. So this person might be an accountant or something like that, or whatever. This person might be involved in finance themselves, but I don't know. They could be involved. It could be a travel agent, to be honest with you, or something like that. Although the ninth, the ninth. I mean, Mercury, all that stuff. It could be, but something maybe with travel, or with it could be with international finance. That's what I think might be, or something like that. Or if not, that's something they might look at. But that. What was I talking about? The Mercury and the Saturn, or the, it was this Jupiter. It was this, we've already talked about how this Jupiter is screwed by the combustion, and the Moon. The Moon and the Jupiter are screwed by the conjunction, or the combustion. And notice how the Moon is the ruler of the second. But this Mercury that we were just talking about rules the finances. So I'm going to amend my thing. I think that the finances are middling okay, because even though Mercury is pushing to the Saturn, Saturn's in his fall. So I think it might be the kind of thing where I save up, and then things kind of drip through, which tends to happen with Pisces. We could look at the Lord of Substance too, which is what, 6 degrees, so 25 Sagittarius to 6, back 150, and back another 19, 150. 19, it's somewhere in Sagittarius. Okay, so the part of substance is in Sagittarius. There are going to be money issues with this person, and they might actually have like get big money, lose big money, big money, lose, because the it looks like the part of substance is like 27 or 8 Sagittarius, right, involved in all this stuff. So it looks like there probably is some big gaining and big losing is probably what I'm seeing here. Okay, let's move to the next one. Kaya Kli. Okay, Kaya Kli. Oh, this was the one with the, this was the one that had the, where we were talking about fertility. We kind of, because we found a helper, right? We found a, what was it? It was the third down. It was, oh no, it was the first one down. It was the second one. It's the stronger helper, not the strongest helper, but the stronger helper, because it's within 2 degrees of the ascendant. It's in good condition with the Venus. And no other kind of impediments. I mean, it's not really close enough to the Mars for the Mars to be impeding it yet. So right now it's really just involved with the Venus. So it's in good condition. It's in its own sign. It's within 2 degrees. Excellent. We love that. We've got this void of course moon that's in detriment. Now that's interesting. Now that's a more interesting question of how does this moon affect matters in this chart, right? It's in detriment.
Detriment, yeah.
Right? It's in detriment. It's void of course. So it's got 2 impediments. It's not just one impediment, which means more screwed up things can happen, you know, more problems, or they can experience, you know, more issues and problems. See, once again, it's kind of like with our friend who's got the difficult moon situation in our session. We know that person is very talented and has a lot of good things that they are able to do and accomplish. It's the moon that makes them question themselves in this case, right? It's the moon that makes them question it, or not feel worthy, or not feel that they can really do it, or and so then it might make them not do it. So that's kind of how I'm looking at how the moon can be causative in our decision making and our actions, right? Because if I've got a moon in really bad condition, then whatever's going on with me internally can keep me from making things happen that need to happen. And so, and actually, you know what, my friend that I was telling you about, who can barely, you know, speak a coherent sentence sometimes, he's got moon in Cancer. Can't hold a job down. You had no money, can't hold a job down.
But I have a theory about it. It may be wrong, but if the moon is in Cancer, then that means the moon is in its domicile, right? So we know that moon is, maybe moody is not the right word, but moon goes through many phases. So when it's in its own house and it's going through all those phases, so isn't that apt?
I like that. And I think that's part of my own, that's also part of my own feeling about moon in Cancer when things are fucked up, is that she makes you roll with all the punches. That she can make you roll with all the punches. Right, because you're rolling with her, you roll with the moon. And so when she's in Cancer, she's got the power to bring it all at you. Does that make sense? She's got when she's fucked like this, then she doesn't necessarily have the power to bring anything to you.
Exactly, my point.
That's my question. So that's my question about a chart like this, is that is this person having problems getting what they want because this moon is fucked? that's my rhetorical question. And like you, my thinking around the moon in Cancer where everything is fucked is that moon is strong enough to bring everything, is to roll everything at you. And you can either handle it or you can't. And I haven't noticed that people with moon in Cancer are more on top of their emotions. What I have noticed that people with moon in Cancer are just more aware of them happening. Like they're more kind of in the stream of it. They're not like controlling it better than anybody else. You know, they're just kind of in it. They identify more with it. They identify
More in
more.
touch with their emotional side.
We're being led around more by the moon.
Yeah.
Right. Sun in Cancer can be led around more,
Exactly.
I find, right? Your Cancer, and especially Cancer rising. Cancer rising, stay away. No, but I lived with the Cancer rising, it was horrible. And they're not all bad. I have one of my very best friends, the Cancer rising, she's fantastic. But seriously, Cancer rising especially is led by the nose, by the moon. Led by the nose.
Well, I have a Cancer moon that's conjunct with my North Node in Cancer too. So.
Oh, you do? Okay, so you kind of understand. Do you understand? So what would you say would be kind of the difference?
Oh gosh. Well, I have it in the last decan, so it can feel like it's in the dark part of the moon in a way. And it's like I'll get excited and I'll want to do something, and then when I come up to it, I'm like, this probably won't work. It's like I psych myself out at the last minute. But I always want it because there's that North Node there. You know, it's like I want to do this thing. I just
Interesting. So the moon isn't necessarily helping to make things happen. See, so
no, I feel like I'm excessively moody, and it definitely gets in my way.
okay, all right. So do you remember when we were talking about the moon being a benefic and me saying that I thought it was really more
It's
neutral,
like a sort of fatalism in a way.
reflective? Is that what you said? Reflective?
I don't know.
Yeah, that makes sense. Because I found like Lily, who was with us too, she was very reflective of her mood, her moodiness.
Yeah.
And she had a stellium in Cancer with the moon there, and Jupiter too. And she was very reflective. Interesting. All right. Well, let's go on. But this is just to kind of bring you into my thinking. That's all I'm doing, is bringing you into my thinking. I don't know whether or not it's the case. I mean, yeah, sorry about that. Oh, good. So the recording is still going. Good. For some reason I'm having issues with my internet today. I was having some earlier today. Oh, that was Kai Clay. I think we're pretty much done with this chart, but this is a really good example of what I'm talking about. It's a really good example of how important is the moon. You know, the moon is, I mean, I'm really adopting this idea of the moon being the governess of all matters. And that whenever you're looking at a chart, you would always look at the significator for what you're asking about. So if I'm not asking about love, I would look at Venus and I would look at the 7th house, but I would also look at the moon, right? Because the moon would represent whether the dice are going to roll that way or not. So that's kind of where I'm going with some of that stuff. Okay, let's move on. Luna Saga. Okay, so it looks like we've got Venus advancing. We've got the moon advancing. We've got
Anthony, can I ask something?
Of course.
Can I say something?
Me, sorry about that. It seems to keep dropping. I'm so sorry. Hold on one second. I'm going to try something. The extender is supposed to be stronger than the damn